Hello everyone, this is Nitpicking Nerd, and I finally finished my rewatch of the original Star Trek series. And a while ago I made a long review of all the Star Trek shows in one video, and I ranked all the shows, and I said that I'm putting TOS as number 3. And I said it's because I'm taking into consideration the time it came out in, so I forgave all the lack of special effects. I looked at certain things as an unintentional comedy, so I gave a lot of slack to that show. And because of that I put it at 3rd place. But after now watching the entire show, and I did watch a few episodes which I never saw before, which were great, I actually think this show is much better than I gave it credit for, and I still wouldn't change my ranking, but I think I can say it's still 3rd place without giving that slack I gave. Meaning, even if I consider it as if they all came together at the same time, I would still have put TOS at 3rd place. And if I was truly judging all the shows based on the time they came out in, I probably would have put TOS as number 1, even better than TNG. If I really did that ranking objectively, judging each show by the time it came out in, I actually think TOS probably would be number 1. So what changed my mind? I was ranking those shows, as I told you, I never really was a big fan of TOS. I started watching Star Trek as a kid with TNG, and I watched it numerous times, and I watched all the other shows. And only occasionally I would go back and watch an episode of TOS, and so I was never really a huge fan of TOS. I really loved the TNG and Deep Space Nine, and all the other Star Trek shows were just okay, with occasional very good episodes and a lot of crappy episodes. But TOS never really appealed to me that much, and I think, I admit, it's mostly because of the bad special effects. I just couldn't get into it as easily. And it's really good to have the Blu-ray with the improved special effects. It makes it all much more watchable. They upgraded a lot of the stuff that really kind of annoyed me when I remember I watched that in the past. For example, I remember how I hated that all the phaser special effects, it looked really cartoony, but in the Blu-ray it looks much better, much more realistic looking, much similar to the other later Star Trek shows. And so the Blu-ray really made the show much more watchable, except a few places where I actually prefer the original special effect, especially when it comes to practical special effects. For example, the one episode showed an android opening his belly, and he had those old primitive wires inside, so that makes it comedy gold. But in the Blu-ray they actually fixed him up to looking like a modern special effect, but that ruined that comedy element of it. So I think in the practical special effects it's best to leave it as it was and only improve the CGI, as phaser fire, stuff like that. So that's my small criticism, but overall the Blu-ray made it much more watchable. And in the beginning this show was kind of a mixed bag. Some episodes were okay, some of them were crappy, some scenes were good, some scenes were bad, but somewhere in the middle of the show it suddenly became really, really good. Every single episode was a good one, and every time something totally different, unexpected, and some of them even felt original today. After watching so many other Star Trek shows and science fiction shows, some of the original show episodes felt original to me now, so that's really amazing. A lot of them are really funny, like intentional comedy funny, good funny, and some good acting even, and so the show really improved somewhere in the middle when it suddenly started having really good episodes in a row, one after the other, and so that really kind of improved the ranking of the show in my mind. And even the acting became really good, like even Shatner and Nimoy was brilliant in some scenes. And Shatner had a lot of scenes with some bad acting, but occasionally he actually delivered some brilliant acting, so it was kind of surprising. Oh, so you can act? So there were a few episodes in which he was acting really good. By the way, one of my favorites, one of the funniest episodes in my opinion, is a piece of the action, especially toward the end of the episode when Kirk starts behaving like a gangster after he realized how things work on that planet. Suddenly he started behaving that way and talking like them. It's one of the funniest episodes in my opinion, and especially thanks to his acting, which was actually good. And so I really kind of changed my mind about this show in a lot of ways. I now get it why so many people love this show over the other ones. Even that whole argument of Kirk versus Picard, I was always kind of firmly on Picard's side, but that was mostly because I knew Kirk from the movies and some of the episodes I watched, which I guess I watched some of the bad ones, so I never even considered that a legitimate question. But now I might actually have to pick Kirk after watching the whole show, because he did have some of those traits which Picard was good at as well. Like Picard was a very good diplomat, was a very moral person, and he found solutions no one else could think of, and so he was a really inspiring character. And Captain Kirk, I always looked at him as kind of that silly, kind of cowboy type, using violence to get things done. So in my mind Picard was far superior with the idea of Star Trek, but after watching the whole show I saw that Kirk actually does have those traits of Picard as well. It's true that Kirk is much more kind of irritable, he's much more a hothead, and he does use the Force kind of quickly, but one of the things that did piss me off about Picard is that sometimes he was too pacifistic, kind of too much. And seeing Kirk is kind of refreshing compared to that. Maybe that means he's not a perfect character, that he doesn't have that patience of Picard, but who said the character should be perfect? I mean, character flaws makes a character much more fun in many ways, so Kirk being more of a hothead is not necessarily a bad thing from an entertainment viewpoint. Like, who is more fun to watch? Would you rather watch Picard fight someone on some planet or Kirk? Kirk would obviously be much more fun. So overall, when I look at everything together, because Kirk did have those inspiring elements as well, he did use diplomacy, he did get things done diplomatically as well, he did have some good speeches and stuff, so he did have those good traits of Picard as well as the physical traits of being kind of more alpha male. And so I have to say, maybe Kirk in the series actually is a better captain in some ways, because he can do more things. Like Picard, I wouldn't send him to fist fight someone, I would send him on a diplomatic mission. They tried to do that a little bit in TNG to show Picard as being a tough guy, but it wasn't that believable. With Kirk, it's a little more believable. Kirk was kind of a more entertaining character overall. He was kind of a combination, like if you combine Riker with Picard together, then maybe you would get Kirk. He had more things in him. And also all the love stories, all the times, he bangs all the women in the galaxy, which is also an interesting topic to discuss. This is something that always people poke fun at, that Kirk is such a ladies' man, and also I used to think, he's not really a gentleman if he's behaving that way, and Picard was more like a gentleman. He would never just, bang a woman and dump her immediately. He's not that kind of person. But again, if we are meant to identify with the hero, then wouldn't we all be behaving more like Kirk if we had the opportunity? Kirk is kind of like the male fantasy, like he's living the life we all wanted to live. Would we want to live the life of Picard, who is kind of a more boring character in that sense, in the sexuality department, or would we want to be more like Kirk? And so Kirk is like the fulfillment of a male fantasy, and so in that sense he's kind of a more entertaining character to watch, because he's getting the stuff that we wish we would have gotten. And as for being a gentleman or not, I was actually surprised by the show that Kirk was a gentleman almost throughout the show, and the so-called reputation he got was kind of not his fault, because it's all because of the episodic nature of the show. So because he keeps going to a different planet all the time and he meets new people, so every time some woman would fall in love with him or vice versa, and there will be kind of a love story, and then he moves on to the other planet and it begins all over again. So it's like a reset button all the time in between episodes. So if you look at the whole show overall, it makes it look as if Kirk is such a ladies' man that he keeps banging all the women in the galaxy. But if you look at each episode individually, then he is being a gentleman in each of those instances. And so we can't really judge him that way. And it really kind of made me annoyed at the JJ movies, because they kind of poked fun at that whole idea of Kirk being so horny and all of that. And I started feeling that was a bit unfair. I guess it works as a parody. If you look at it as a comedy, then it works. But in some ways it is a bit insulting to the character, because he wasn't really like that as they portrayed him in the JJ movies. Like, he's banging all the women, he has multiple alien women in his bed. The original Kirk never did that. He was very gentleman, and most times he didn't even initiate any of those things. A lot of the times it was the woman initiating it with him, and so it's not really his fault. And again, it's like the male fantasy, like every man, that's his fantasy, that all women would want him. And so I started feeling like all that criticism against Kirk is unfair, that all those parodies and the JJ movies started showing him as that horny guy who just wants to bang women and doesn't care about them. It's a little bit unfair, but then toward the end of TOS, he did, in some episodes, he did behave like a little bit like that. For example, there was an episode in which they went to some club on some pleasure planet, and Kirk suddenly tells McCoy, let's go over to that other place, the women there are, and they never finish the sentence, but it kind of sounded like they were going to a whorehouse or something, so that was kind of not as appropriate, I guess. And also there were a few episodes in which he was kind of exploiting women, like there was that episode when they were on a planet which was like in the Roman Empire, and it had slaves, and one of those guys, one of the slave masters, sent his slave woman to pleasure Kirk, and Kirk agreed to that. So I kind of scratched my head, wait a second, Kirk knows that woman is a slave who is following orders, and he still sleeps with her. So that makes Kirk kind of nasty. And so overall I think that impression that those parodies were kind of justified because of all those scenes like that in which Kirk was kind of like behaving like a dog. And also, you know, a comedy is fine to exaggerate things in a parody, and so overall I'm fine with that. Eventually, somewhere in the middle, I was becoming kind of angry that they kind of did an injustice to the character of Kirk, but overall I kind of get that, I can understand that. And as for sexism in the show, I do think there were a lot of examples of kind of sexism that you don't even notice with each episode individually, but if you think of the show overall, you do kind of notice all kinds of patterns which are kind of sexist. For example, there were numerous episodes in which a female crew member of the Enterprise kind of betrays the rest of the crew because she falls in love with one of the bad guys. For example, that woman who fell in love with Khan, that woman who fell in love with Apollo. There was also that female Romulan captain who tried to seduce Spock, and she kind of fell for Spock, and then he used that against her. So she was kind of weak and dumb. So there were a lot of female characters with all kinds of weaknesses like that because they are too sensitive, or they are too weak, or they fall in love easily and easily manipulated, or they manipulate others. So I do think there were the occasional kind of sexist ideas in there, and also a few racist ideas. There were a few small scenes which seem a little bit racist by today's standards, even though overall the show was anti-racism because it shows the bridge crew composed of all the races of humanity working together. That's a very nice idea. I guess some people might complain, oh, but the black woman was only like the secretary, she was only taking the phones. And there were sometimes all kinds of stereotypical things related to race. For example, one time they went to some planet in which everything they think about comes true, and something appears for the person who is thinking about something, and then for Sulu, a samurai appeared, a samurai warrior who chases him around and tries to fight him with a sword. So I kind of laughed at that, thinking, oh, so Sulu, he's Japanese, so of course he will think of a samurai who will attack him. So all kinds of stuff like that in some episodes does feel like a little bit racist, a little bit kind of stereotypical or sexist. I think people today watching this show should just look at it as a comedy, so anytime you see stuff like that, just laugh at it. Instead of getting offended, just imagine it's a deliberate comedy, and of course it's making fun of all the stereotypes, and that's fine. If you look at it like that, then you would enjoy it, it wouldn't piss you off. If you look at it as kind of a serious show, then it might piss you off to see things like that. For example, in one episode I went to a planet which was like Earth, only that the so-called, and I'm quoting Kirk, he said, the yellow civilization is the civilized one on this planet, and the white man on this planet is the savage. Like it's a reverse situation, so that sounded kind of racist, like, oh, the yellows are supposed to be the savages, and the white man is supposed to be civilized, and on this planet is the same races, but they're reversed. So that was kind of cringy as hell. I remember thinking this is kind of racist, but you know, the overall message is anti-racist because they were showing that no, the yellow people can be the civilized one and vice versa. So it's like they were breaking up the stigmas that existed back then, because back then people were thinking like this, and so this show was actually challenging those ideas, and so it was still doing a good thing overall for that time. But today it seems kind of way too much kind of a racist way of thinking, so it's kind of a mixed bag. Anyway, this review is getting a bit too long, so I think I will end it here, and I will discuss a few more specific topics I wanted to discuss in their own video so that people can find it and they won't have to listen to such a long review to get to the parts they are interested in. So I think I will split it up to a few videos by topics. Overall, I think TOS is a good show even by today's standards. A lot of really funny episodes, sometimes intentionally, sometimes not, but still funny. Interesting ideas, interesting stories, stuff to debate about, to talk about. So overall, I think this show is still relevant even till this day. It is the most imaginative and original. It is the first one to do a lot of these ideas. In the later shows, they kind of took the same ideas, did them differently, did them better or worse sometimes. But a lot of those ideas originated from this show. And in my next videos, I want to discuss some of the similarities and differences in some of the same ideas that were first shown in TOS and later reused again for TNG, and all the differences and changes and what's better or worse. And it's kind of a mixed bag because sometimes those ideas were done much better in TNG and sometimes vice versa. Sometimes I think the way it was done in TOS was actually much better than in TNG, and I will explain that in detail in my next video. So please subscribe, please like, let me know what you think in the comment section and we can discuss it, and I will see you all next time. Bye bye.